webinar. I'm Gillian Degan. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer here at ABC Research, and I'm joined by Ivy Cho, who is our Business Development Director for ABC Research, and she is the one who's focused on restaurants and food service.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. We're very excited for this webinar. So, like Gillian said, I am the Business Development Director for this type of work. So I hope that we can answer some questions for you.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Today, what we're hoping to cover is just kind of a timeline and an update about where menu labeling has come from, what pending proposed rules are out there, and kind of what's hanging in the balance right now with the Supreme Court. And then we'll go over some details for what the proposed rule, how the proposed rule laid out menu labeling, and what type of compliance is going to be, well, is what the FDA is thinking about requiring. Throughout this webinar, if you do have a question, there's a little button on your screen that looks like a hand with a green arrow on it. You can always hit that and ask a question, and it'll show up on my screen. And I think what we're going to do, because it'll show up in a written form on the screen, we'll go ahead and wait and do question and answer at the end. But if you think of something in the meantime, feel free to go ahead and send it over, and we'll make note of that. All right, so our timeline. In March of 2010, we saw the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act signed into law. And this not only, looked at universal health care for the U.S., but specifically Section 4205 talked about menu labeling for restaurants and retail food establishments that have 20 or more locations. Specifically, this act gives FDA the authority to write a rule and enforce it for chain restaurants to list calorie content information on menus and menu boards. Obviously it's been more than a year ago. During that time, the FDA has put out a proposed rule. However, because Section 4205 is just one section of the Affordable Care Act, and we've had lots of questions on the legality and the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, in March of this year, we saw that called into question and actually presented in front of the Supreme Court. What we're waiting on now, the justices of the Supreme Court have made their decisions, but of course are writing their opinions, which can be pages and pages long. And we're expected to hear what their decisions are about constitutionality and keeping the Affordable Care Act on the books, that we're probably expecting to hear something in June of this year. Until then, what we have to look at as an industry is just that proposed rule from the FDA. So this is a proposed rule that was put out and open for comment. Comment period has now closed, but at least it gives us a good idea of FDA's initial strike at menu labeling and what their ideas were of how to present the information, what they expect out of restaurants and retail food service as far as compliance and methods by which to determine your nutritional data. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the basics of the proposed rule. As I already stated, this is establishments that have 20 or more locations, and their primary focus is being a restaurant. Movie theaters, bowling alleys, other places where food might be sold, but it's not the primary business activity, would actually be exempt. For the restaurants that have 20 or more locations, you would be expected to show a calorie count for any standard menu items right next to the menu item on your menu. In addition, FDA would expect to see a succinct statement of suggested daily caloric intake, and in the proposed rule there were some examples of such a statement. And then you would have to have additional nutritional information available on the premises if a guest was to request additional information. In addition to what we consider, traditional menu items that you'd see on a menu or a menu board, calorie postings are also required for food on display, and that might mean something in a deli case where a customer wouldn't necessarily look at a menu but actually walk up, see something like a dish of potato salad and ask for a serving of it. Regardless of where the food is, if the food is on a menu, if it's food on display like at a deli or a buffet, FDA would consider food that's not labeled misbranded if it's served in a restaurant that has 20 or more locations. As with any FDA guidance, this proposed rule included many different definitions, and one is for a standard menu item. And the standard menu item is defined as food that's routinely listed or offered for sale, even as self-service or food on display. And this would include, for instance, if you have a pizza restaurant and you have, a veggie deluxe, a barbecue, maybe a Hawaiian pie, and all of those are listed on your menu, each one of those, because they're individual menu items, would be considered standard and will require a caloric count next to them on the menu. We also see definitions for combination meals, variable menu items where you may be able to switch out, let's say, a side of fries for a side of apple slices. That would be a variable menu item. Self-service food, which is a buffet. Food on display, like at a deli. Custom orders or daily specials. And it sounds like the FDA is, covering every possible food you could think of. Believe it or not, there are actually some exclusions. If there is something that's placed on the counter or the table for general use, let's say the good old bottle of ketchup on the table, that is not something that you have to provide a calorie count for. Daily specials or temporary menu items that are, let's say, offered for less than 60 consecutive days on the menu, you do not have to provide nutritional information for those. And then if you do market tests in either regionally or across your entire enterprise, if the item is on the menu for less than 90 days, you do not have to provide nutritional information for that either. Alcoholic beverages are also exempted in the proposed rule. As far as to what precision the FDA talked about having caloric information declared, they suggested in the proposed rule increments of 5 calories up to and including 50 calories, and then after you get above 50 calories for a menu item, you can round to the nearest 10-calorie increment. There are also many, many different situations or, I guess, options for listing combo meals and variable menu items. One of which was a range for combo meals, so depending on the different side you may have or different toppings on a sandwich or a salad, you may have a pretty large range of calories. One of the options FDA gave was a range for a menu item. Another option was also to list every different combination. I think we all know what sounds easier. And again, this is a proposed rule, so FDA did take suggestions on, especially a lot of suggestions were made during the comment period on variable menu items, such as pizzas, where you may have thousands and thousands of combinations of toppings. How is a pizza restaurant expected to handle that? And those are a lot of the comments that we saw from folks on the proposed rule. Okay, so one of the options that was given specifically for pizza or items that have different toppings was to give a declaration of nutritional information for the basic preparation of the pizza. So let's say a cheese pizza, and then giving separate declaration for toppings that a customer could add on. So, a serving of pepperoni or a serving of green pepper. FDA also allows some combination of items that have a similar nutrient makeup, or you could list them as a group. If you think about it, putting calorie count on your menu does take up a significant amount of space, especially when you're talking about a menu board or even a menu at a drive-thru. So FDA did give a couple of options for ways to kind of restrict the amount of space taken up by the information that they're wanting to see. Talking about buffet restaurants, and I believe we have a couple of folks listening today from buffet chains, the FDA actually was suggesting calories per item or per serving must be posted on a sign adjacent to the item. And so this is interesting. Depending on, let's say, if it's a fried fish fillet, that might be calories per fillet because somebody is probably not going to take half a fillet and put it on their plate. So you'd do it per item. But if it's something like green beans, it may be listed per serving. We're talking about multiple serve items. FDA gave the example of rotisserie chicken. You know, that could be displayed, it would be displayed as the entire bird, but could also additionally be displayed as a calories per serving. So you do have some options there about what you show. And if you're going to list an individual portion, such as a slice of a pizza or a slice of cake, it should be listed as calories per serving. Now, when we're talking about determining nutritional content, there are several ways you guys can go about doing this, and the FDA did list several in their proposed rule. It was FDA's opinion that they will be open to nutritional databases, so something like a Genesis database, and we'll talk about the differences between a couple of these in a second. They are definitely open to full laboratory analysis of your food items. And then depending on how much you buy, you know, maybe as a prepackaged food, you can solicit nutritional information from your suppliers and use that label right off of the package. So, for instance, you're buying a ranch dressing. It may come from a major processor of dressings, and it may come with a serving size nutritional facts panel. You can use that. Overall, the FDA's opinion was that you must provide information on the reasonable basis used to calculate. So let's say if this proposed rule goes into a final form and the FDA questions your caloric data or any of the additional nutritional information you have on file, you have to be able to give them background on a reasonable basis of why you used a certain type of analysis to arrive at your final answer. Now, the two types of analysis that I think will probably be most common for folks pulling together their nutritional information for menu labeling purposes will either be a database analysis or a laboratory analysis. To cover both of those, to give you a little bit of an idea of the background, database analysis uses a product's recipe to calculate nutritional values. So if you could imagine if you have, let's say, a salad and you have a recipe for that salad, as I build that salad, literally putting everything together in the bowl to serve it to a guest, that salad is very much well represented by that recipe. There's no cooking involved. I'm really not changing any of the constituents of the salad. Database analysis is great to use with things like salads, sandwiches, maybe like a fresh salsa where there is no cook step and you won't really be changing any of the constituents. And by changing constituents, I mean losing moisture, rendering off fat. You may be losing parts of a marinade that contain a significant amount of sodium. Anything where during your cooking process you see a distinct change in the food. We reserve database analysis truly for items that don't change much. So, you know, combining ingredients to make a salad, combining ingredients to make a sandwich, or maybe a fresh salad dressing or sauce. And these database analyses can be completed. They're actually completed using a software package, and again, it's done off of the product's recipe. Now, on the other side of the coin, we have laboratory analysis. And laboratory analysis is the process by which a laboratory physically, you would send a laboratory your food sample, your menu item itself, and food scientists actually physically extract the fat, the dietary fiber. We quantify protein, we quantify sodium, all of the different aspects of the nutritional label that you're expected to have on hand for a guest. We actually physically do the laboratory evaluation of that item. It is the most accurate determination of nutritional information because we actually have the food right there in front of us, and that's in its final form. You could imagine putting together, let's say, a casserole by following a recipe, after you bake at, let's say, 400 degrees for 30 minutes. A lot of things have changed in that casserole dish and would probably result in a significantly different nutritional analysis. You've lost moisture during that cooking time. You may have had, a loss in moisture is also going to result in a change in the proportion of fat, the proportion of protein, all of that, just because you're losing a lot of water weight during that baking process. So again, laboratory analysis takes into account any changes to the formulation during cooking. Kind of to give you an idea of an easy difference in the type of information you can see on a database and a laboratory analysis, a great case study is hash browns. So if you can imagine, you're gonna make hash browns, and let's say you're using a flat top griddle or just a regular saute pan in your kitchen. To make the hash browns, I'm gonna have my two ingredients: oil and shredded potatoes, and I'm gonna go ahead and portion a known amount of oil into the pan. After that, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add my shredded potatoes, and I'm going to start to saute my hash browns. Now, the interesting part is if we did a database analysis on the hash browns, what would we be using to quantify the nutritional data? We would be using the amount of oil and the type of oil, and we would be using the amount of potatoes, just literally what is truly off the recipe, out of the cookbook for that menu item. Now, as my potatoes finish sauteing and they're that beautiful brown color, what am I going to do? I'm going to plate it up and I'm going to serve it to a guest. So the question is, what's the difference between what I started with and what the guest is actually going to get on their plate? Well, I think we all know that there's still going to be oil left in that saute pan or on that flat top grill. This is one of the easiest case studies just to kind of envision in your head. That leftover oil in the saute pan or on that grill is not going to be taken into account when I run a full laboratory analysis. The guest is not going to consume it. Therefore, for an accurate portrayal of the nutritional information, that oil should not be taken into account. So when you're looking at the difference between the nutritional data that you would get from a database is going to take every single bit of that oil that you put into that pan into account. That means every gram of fat and every calorie that comes from it is going to be part of that final number. When you're talking about the laboratory analysis, literally what you're serving up to that guest is what you would be sending into a lab. So all of that remaining oil in the pan, it's not going to count against you. You're not going to have the grams of fat, the calories coming from that remaining oil. That's not going to be included in your analysis. And it's interesting with things like hash browns how you'll actually get a lower calorie count and a lower fat gram count when you look into doing a laboratory analysis. Another good example is imagine you have some chicken wings and you're going to toss them in sauce. You're going to put 10 chicken wings in a stainless steel bowl. You're going to pour in 2 ounces of buffalo sauce, and you're going to use your tongs to toss those wings. Well, what's your percent pickup with the sauce? That's a really hard thing to measure, but I know that if I toss the wings in the sauce and then I put them onto a platter, I serve them to a guest, there's a significant amount of buffalo sauce left all over the inside of that bowl. And what does that buffalo sauce have in it? It has fat, and it certainly has a significant amount of sodium. in a laboratory analysis, that sodium is not going, that's in that remaining sauce is not going to count against you. It's not going to be counted in the analysis of the food. If you use a database, unfortunately, all you're starting with and all you have to go on is that recipe, so you're unfortunately going to have to quantify the amount of sodium in the full 2 ounces of sauce. Now, sounds like I'm bad-mouthing database analysis a little bit, but it definitely has its place. If I build a salad or a sandwich going off of a recipe and I give it to a guest, I'm leaving nothing behind in the kitchen, and that is a perfect opportunity to use a database analysis. It is cost-effective, it's time-effective, and it accurately represents certain menu items like salads, sandwiches, fresh sauces. What I want to impress upon the group today is that a laboratory analysis truly does give an accurate portrayal of cooked items, and it's something to think about that. Anything you have coming out of a fryer, a saute pan, any piece of meat coming off of a grill where you're going to render off fat, you're probably going to render off a lot of your marinade that has sodium in it. Fat and sodium are hot buttons for consumers. So it's items like that we like to advise folks to do a full laboratory analysis on, get numbers that, much better, portray your menu items than necessarily what you get with a database. As far as talking about expected compliance, in that proposed rule from the FDA, they did give some idea of their first thoughts on compliance and accuracy and what they expect out of a restaurant. And I think all of us know, if you go in the back of the house, there are a lot of different things that happen in restaurants. There can be a lot more variation in restaurant food versus what you may see coming out of a processing environment for a retail product, where you have a lot more control. In a restaurant sense, you may have sauces that are made from scratch, already adding in a little bit of variation. And then, portioning. My dollop of sour cream might be a little bit different from your dollop of sour cream. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about expected compliance and then some of the ways we advise clients to handle issues like variability in the back of the house. So at a first blush, the FDA actually kind of gave guidance on, let's call it the good things, the healthy things, the protein and dietary fiber. They want to see, if they go and they check your values, that your protein and dietary fiber would be at least as high as what you're saying it is when you give that additional information to a guest. When they're talking about what I call the scary parts in the nutritional label, the calories, sugar, total fat, saturated fat, trans fat, cholesterol, and sodium, they don't want you to be in any more than 20% of excess of your declared value. So this is similar, and as you look at the protein, carbs, and dietary fiber, can't be any less than 80% less than declared value. They're kind of bouncing around the ideas that are used with retail labels. You want to give somebody a plus or minus 20% range where you do have some wiggle room around your declared value. More specifically, talking about ranges, like we talked about with combination meals, if you are going to give a range for the combo meal, your lowest value would be used for compliance. So if you're saying the healthiest option for a specific combo meal is 230 calories, but it could range up to 860 calories if you choose some of the more indulgent items. That lowest value of 230 calories is what the FDA is going to nail you for compliance. And that's obviously just to keep people in check as far as, marketing and using those calorie counts for marketing claims. Now, talking about, FDA's proposed ideas of compliance and all the variation that we can see in menu items and food service entrees and appetizers, it's kind of like being stuck between a rock and a hard place. One of the ways that we consult our clients to try to mitigate some of that risk is by looking at replicates and doing a composite sample if we're doing a full laboratory analysis. And And so, the more replicates you have, if we're blending those all together, we are taking the amount of variation we may see dish to dish and kind of evening the playing field by running a composite sample. That's one of the easiest things you can do. I also see that there's a question from somebody about sampling and getting samples to us. That kind of actually goes along with expected compliance and how we advise folks. We will actually advise you. You can you have the option of looking at samples across your 20 or more locations, and we can help with sampling those. We have samplers all across the U.S. Or if you'd like, send us a set of what you would consider gold standard samples from your corporate chef. Those gold standard samples should be highly metered on the amount, making sure that that is prepared to the T. And your corporate chef would be the best person. After that, compliance in your individual stores is really based on how robust your training protocols are. So that's just one of the ways we kind of advise folks to mitigate that risk. Talking about mitigating risk, we have a couple of questions to go over for today, which I think will probably fill up the rest of our time here. But just to let you know, and I'll leave this slide up for the remainder of the webinar, we are going to do a second webinar. Actually, it'll be after probably all of us get back from the National Restaurant Association show about the mitigation of risk in menu labeling. When we finally see a final rule from the FDA, one of the main concerns, and this is something that we talk to people about daily, is how do I mitigate that risk? I'm opening the door for people to ask questions, for people to, go and test behind my back, the good old, news magazine on TV, pulling a sample, and then all of a sudden, your brand name is on TV and saying that you don't have, accurate nutritional data. What are all of my different options? How do I minimize the amount of risk to my brand after, I am forced to put these values out there? So we're going to do a second webinar. Trust me, it's probably enough to fill up an hour-long webinar just on mitigating risk and what your options are with the way you structure your sampling, the way you structure your testing, and also some verbiage that you can use to kind of insulate yourself against some future questions with nutritional labeling. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll through my list of questions. So give me just a second to see what you guys sent in, because we have a couple here. Okay, somebody in our group has a question about would we send you a completely cooked recipe with our particular items used in the recipe, or do you use what you have available? So the way I interpret this is what you're asking is if you're going to submit samples for a full laboratory analysis, what do we really need to get from you? What we would ask is that you send in, at a minimum, 3 to 5, let's say, depending on how large your serving size is, servings of a specific, of let's say the specific entree in question, and that's a minimum. The more you want to send us, again, the more you're going to minimize the variability from dish to dish, and we want you to cook this just as if you were going to give it to a guest. So that means if at the last minute an expediter, sprinkles parsley on the dish or, puts a garnish on the dish, whatever it is, all the edible parts of that dish need to be present. And you should strive to make that dish as close to the recipe and your ops manual as possible. You want it to be that gold standard. And what we would do when we get your samples, again, we want to average out any kind of variation we're going to see. So we're going to take each of those individual servings, we're going to weigh them so we can have those different weights to average to get an average serving weight. And then we're literally going to take all of those servings and blend them together physically to create one composite sample. And we're going to do one nutritional analysis on that composite sample. So I see that there's another question on kind of how do we remit results, like what would you actually get back after submitting a sample. After submitting a sample, whether you submit it for a database analysis where you're going to send us your recipe, or you're going to submit an actual food sample for a full laboratory analysis, we remit results in a lot of different forms. So we give you a lot of options. And this should be something that anybody, worth their salt, bad food pun, in this business should be able to do. We can give back what we call a multi-column result, which shows every specific nutrient and their level at a 100-gram serving and also at your specific serving size, so you have those values ready to go on your menu as per the whole entree serving size. We also have ready-to-print nutritional facts panels, so some folks like to have that formatting for their website. We can give you that as well. Or if you just want us to give you back an Excel format where you can send that straight to your web designer to put online, or to your graphics folks where they can just have easy data to work with, just to translate directly into your menu or your menu board, or printed pamphlets, we can do that as well. And we can also honor any kind of file transfer protocols. If you have a system where you want us to upload directly into your system, we can do that as well. All right, so going forward, let me see some of the other questions here. All right, we have a question about, okay, what would need to be provided for, instead of doing a full laboratory analysis like we just talked about, what would have to be provided for a database label? So if you were going to choose to do a database label, let's say you're going to send in the recipe for a salad or a sandwich, we would need that recipe to be based on the weights of the different ingredients. So we need it on a per weight basis, and what we would do is go ahead and look at that menu, and depending on what types of ingredients you have, if you have fairly standard ingredients, we would already have that in our database, so we would not need any further information on, let's say, lettuce, tomato, certain traditional menu items like that. Now, if you have a proprietary sauce, let's say that you have a special sauce used or a special proprietary dressing that you have created, we would actually go ahead and contact your supplier, and we would do this on your behalf, or you could supply the information to us. But from that supplier, what we would need would be full nutritional information that's unrounded on a 100-gram serving of that item. Now, this may seem like it's something that's nearly impossible to get out of suppliers, but when you ask for it in a certain fashion, it's something that all of them have. And it's very important that you do database labels based on, one, the unrounded data, and number two, that 100-gram serving size. And it might sound kind of silly when you're thinking, well, I only use an ounce of this sauce on a sandwich. It may only weigh 30 grams. Why would I use a 100-gram serving? Well, we asked for that information. We asked for it to be unrounded because if we don't, you get into trouble with either looking at too small of a serving size, where a certain constituent, let's say sodium, may round down to be 0. It may be at such a low level and such a small serving size that you're actually not going to catch that when you're looking at using that ingredient in a database label. The rounding rules are the same way. If you have less than half a gram of fat in a serving size, and for a sauce that serving size might only be an ounce, you can round it down to 0. Does it really mean that there is 0 fat there? No. And when I add the fat from that sauce, the fat from my cheese, the fat from my roast beef, the fat from maybe seeds on my sandwich bun, that fat should be taken into account, because if not, it's actually giving you an artificially low reading on that database label, which may get you into trouble later if somebody ever questions your data. So again, we ask for an unrounded 100-gram nutritional information on any of your proprietary ingredients in that recipe. Other than that, we just need the recipe on a weight basis to do a database label. We also do a combination of a database and a full nutritional analysis. So what you see when you look at your menu are probably lots of commonalities. You may use a 6-ounce split chicken breast on a number of different menu items. You might have a grilled chicken sandwich. You might have a grilled chicken entree where you top it with sautéed peppers and cheese. You may use that same chicken breast to grill, slice up, and put on top of a chicken Caesar salad. When we go through and we actually do a menu review for a client, we try to pull out as many of those commonalities as possible. And what we're doing there is we're trying to make our testing and your nutritional information as efficient as possible. So what we will do is say, okay, we're going to take this 6-ounce pumped chicken breast that you use. We're going to take that cooked, just as if you would cook it for a guest, grill it up, season it just as if you would every time you grill it in your restaurant, and we're going to do a full nutritional analysis on that. We're then going to use that information as unrounded 100-gram information that we can build into any other recipe, any recipe on your menu that you use that chicken on. So for a salad with grilled chicken on top, we're going to get your recipe. We're going to say, okay, let me build my salad. So I'm going to have my lettuce, onion, tomato, mushrooms, artichoke hearts. Okay, and then I'm going to take my grilled chicken information, and I'm going to add that in as an ingredient as well. Furthermore, we can take that, again, that same grilled chicken, and let's say you have different toppings for different entrees. Okay, on one grilled chicken, we're going to add in by database goat cheese and peppers. On a different recipe, we're going to take that grilled chicken information, and we're going to add in a different topping. Let's say a slice of melted cheese and some salsa. So what we get out of doing that one laboratory analysis is insanely accurate data to be used in a variety of different database recipes that could compile a number of other items on your menu. So we really try to consolidate the testing, but at the same time provide the most accurate version of the data. All right, so as far as somebody is asking about guidance and advice and how somebody would start a testing protocol and kind of how we would handle that with them. It's a fairly open-ended question, but I'll try to be succinct. When a client approaches us with either a portion or an entire menu, what we do first and foremost is go ahead and go through that listing of items and give them a menu review. This is something that, with our expertise, does not take a long time to do. We do it as a complimentary service for existing or for new clients, and it just means that we're going through your menu and we're looking at, again, commonalities. What items can we do a full lab analysis on and then efficiently use those items to build as many menu items as possible. Secondly, what menu items are appropriate for a database analysis, because, again, it's cost-effective, it's timely to get accurate information by using those. And then thirdly, what menu items in the remainder need to be done by a full laboratory analysis. This is something that we have food scientists, food chemists on staff to handle, and we go ahead and we do that. So all you really need to do to get started would just be to hand over your menu and then answer some questions about your menu. You know, talk to us about the commonalities. Do you always use a 6-ounce chicken breast? Do you always use, are there 3 different cuts of steak that you use in a number of different items? So answering a few simple questions, and then we'll get back to you. And after we do that menu review, you have an idea of how many items would be appropriate to use database analysis for, and then how we're going to build the rest of the menu items on your menu. At that point, we usually sit down with a client and talk about sampling, where we want to see the samples pulled from, how our samplers are going to go out in the field and handle that for you. and then kind of what the timeline is to get everything completed.
So we try to make this process as simple and convenient for you. We provide, all the information that you need. It's a very simple step. You just send us the food and, we get everything compiled for you. So we're here for you for advice, for guidance, and especially, your nutritional information that you need to provide your customers.
All right. So I think we've covered. Oh, here I see another question. Hold on one second. Let's see. Somebody's asking about the turnaround time for testing an item. If we're going to do a full laboratory analysis, if it's just one item, let's say you're a current client of ours, you only have a couple of menu items that are new that are coming out for maybe a seasonal menu implementation, the turnaround time is usually 7 to 10 business days. For a database where you're just remitting the recipe and and any proprietary nutritional information from your suppliers, that usually takes about 5 business days, as long as we have all the information we need. And again, we're happy to talk to your suppliers directly, or you can solicit that information from your suppliers and send it along. If we're talking about a client coming to us with an entire menu that needs to be done, and a lot of folks are doing this, not because there's a due date necessarily set up by the FDA yet, because we're still waiting on a final rule, but they're getting all their ducks in a row now, because there's probably, quite frankly, going to be a mad rush on laboratory services when the FDA does come out with a final rule. We will go through, we'll do that menu review, and kind of depending on the split of how many database labels we can do, how many full analyses we can get through, we can give you a good idea then. And I know that's not a very specific answer, but menus vary greatly. I would say on average for us to complete a menu, between going back and forth with the suppliers, I would say a few weeks is probably average for completing an entire menu. And again, it does depend on the complexity of the menu. And if any of you guys, want to contact us after the fact and kind of go through what type of menu you have, how much variation you have, that's something that I know Ivy would be happy to speak with you about. And because menus can vary greatly, specifically she could give you a lot tighter, timeline and expectations after learning a little bit about everybody's individual concepts. Because just looking at the attendee list, it looks like we have a big, big variety listening today. So, let's see. I think we've completed our questions for today. Again, we are planning a secondary kind of a follow-up webinar on mitigating risk in nutritional labeling. I hope all of you guys will join us May 17th for that. We are going to send out these slides at the conclusion today, so you will have that link on that last slide if you want to register for the next item or our next webinar. But I would like to say thank you for tuning in today. I hope you found it to be good information to kind of bring you up to speed on what we're looking at and what may be coming down the pike. And I encourage any and all of you to go ahead and contact us further if you want to talk specifically about your menus. So thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We're here for you guys, so just give us a call.
All right, everybody, have a good day.